This presentation of In Their Own Words is brought to you by the Honor Project and is dedicated to the brave men and women of the United States Armed Forces. Military snipers were trained sharpshooters assigned to kill a man with one perfect shot. These highly disciplined marksmen often stalked a target for days, waiting for just the right moment to squeeze the trigger. Lurking in the shadows alone, the deadly stealth of the sniper made him the most feared man on the battlefield. As a young hunter, Chuck Mawhinney grew up with a gun in his hand. In October 1967, Mawhinney was just 19 years old when he made his first kill as a scout sniper in Vietnam.
I was born and raised in a small town, southeast Oregon, called Lakeview. Raised on a small ranch. My dad had about a 30-acre ranch. And I spent a lot of time, I started shooting at the age of about 6 years old with my father. Spent a lot of time hunting, a lot of time up in the mountains. Actually, when I joined the Marine Corps, after high school, I joined on the delay program. And I joined immediately on graduation, but I delayed till October 18th to go in because I didn't want to miss deer season that year. So we did a lot of hunting. You know, we were pretty serious about that. Now, had I known what kind of a hunting trip I was going on, I might not have delayed for the 3 months.
But Chuck Mawhinney knew that he was going to Vietnam as soon as he joined the Army.
Boot camp for me was, I was pretty much conditioned for what was going to be in boot camp. I pretty much had an idea what was going to happen. I had friends that had gone in before me that explained what was happening. And it was all I expected it to be. It was a good conditioning program. It was good training. They were also working hard on the Vietnam conflict that was going on. So there was a lot of that added into our basic training.
What did they do? In what way related to Vietnam? I mean, they just a lot of discussion about it, or what?
Yeah, and they would explain some of the training, some of the techniques, the reason for the physical conditioning, the reason that we were doing some of the exercises we were doing is so when we got to Vietnam we would be conditioned and be able to maintain and hold our own.
Now, what about rifle training? I know in the Marine Corps, expert marksmanship's an important legacy. Talk about that.
Okay, the rifle training in the Marine Corps was, we have, after I think it was the 6th week of boot camp, we go up to Camp Pendleton, up to the rifle range, spend a couple of weeks up there and qualified. Then we qualified with the M14. Qualified with the M14 and I ended up qualifying as an expert with the M14. After boot camp, after basic training, they give the people that qualified as expert an opportunity to go to the Scout Sniper School, which it had just started, and I probably went through the 4th or 5th school that they'd started at Camp Orno. Then we had about a 50% washout in Scout Sniper School. But Scout Sniper School was condensed down to about 3.5 weeks at that time. So it was a very tedious school. We ran from daylight till dark and then into the night, and sometimes the days would go by with an hour or two of sleep. But the people who were teaching the school were Vietnam vets, so the people come back and knew what we were going to be facing. So they ran it as realistic as they could. We did everything, not from just the shooting the rifle to land navigation. We went to booby trap courses, so night navigation. They worked us really hard in the short time they had, and the training was outstanding. It was very good. Then again, we had to qualify with the rifle, plus pass the tests, qualify with the rifle to get the MOS as a scout sniper.
Talk about marksmanship. Talk about what you learned as a kid, what you learned in boot camp on the qualification range, and then what sniper school taught you. As though I know nothing about it, what are the fundamentals of good marksmanship, and what did you really find that you used?
Well, like I say, my father, when you're talking about fundamentals of rifle training and shooting, my father was an ex-Marine, so nothing had changed over the years as far as the fundamentals and the teaching, the 8 steps to shooting. Nothing had changed in the Marine Corps that much, that I pretty much had already learned to fire a rifle the way the Marine Corps had taught my father. When I got to boot camp, I think the snapping in tying the slings on and sitting there for hours and hours and hours, getting into the position to stretch the muscles, was a little bit more tedious than I was used to, but it was all excellent because after, a week of staying in positions for an hour, 2 hours at a time, those muscles stretched so you were comfortable when you were shooting, and it made a big difference.
Well, did you say 8 steps to marksmanship?
Right.
Could you tell me about that?
Well, as far as the steps to shooting, the first thing that a person wants is correct body alignment. Get down and get in the right position for the rifle, for your body to be lined up with the weapon. When you're aiming a rifle, you don't move the rifle to the target. You move the body until it's natural point of aim on the target. And then it's just the normal steps you go through in shooting. It's make sure you have proper eye relief. You focus on the crosshairs. You control your breathing. You squeeze on the trigger. All the way through to your follow through at the end. And it's not rocket science. That's just the way everybody was taught in the Marine Corps.
Is there one part of it? Is there the body alignment? Is there the trigger squeeze instead of pull, letting half the breath out or whatever that you think is the most critical part?
It all has to go together, because if you leave one step out, that's going to throw something else off. So everything has to be put in order and put together.
Once in country, Mawhinney was disappointed when he was not assigned to the job he had trained for.
When I got to Vietnam, I was trained as a sniper, so I knew, that was what I was going to end up being. Unfortunately, I got there after the Tet Offensive in '68. When I got there, Lima Company, Lima 3-5, 1st Battalion, or 1st Division, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, had been in Way City, and there probably was 65 people in the company. And when I got there, they assigned me as a rifleman to Lima 3-5. I told them I was a scout sniper, and they said, we don't need scout snipers right now. We're looking for infantry. So I was assigned, and I actually spent 3 months, which was probably some of the best training I got in Vietnam, but I spent 3 months as a rifleman with Lima 3-5. In that time, I learned how to move in the country over there. I learned what gear to take. From Lima 3-5, I ended up being a machine gunner. I had an M16 I had a lot of problems with. Ended up in an ambush one night. The M16 misfired on me, jammed up. Machine gunner ahead of me had got wounded. His A gunner got on the gun, so I crawled up myself in the A gunner. The A gunner got wounded. I ended up on the M60 that night. And I stayed on the M60 that night. I was fortunate enough not to get shot. Well, the next morning when I went to give the machine gun back, you just don't give an M60 back. Once you've got it, once you used it, that's your weapon. For about 2 weeks, Lima 3-5, that's about the time we'd moved down to Anwa, I was a machine gunner. And that was probably the most dangerous job I ever had in Vietnam, because I don't care what happens, what goes on. When there's a firefight, the first thing's hollered out is guns up. They want the firepower up there. And in the short time I was a machine gunner, I literally had a grenade shot on my cartridge belt. I had the stock shot up on the gun while I was shooting it. I lost 2 or 3 partners. And I kind of decided then that if I was going to stay a machine gunner and I had another 10 months left of Vietnam, probably my longevity was being shortened up quite a bit. So from that point on, I kind of faked a toothache. You can do that stuff in the Marine Corps, but I had to be really convincing. And finally, when they sent me into the dentist, into the rear of the 5th Marines, I knew they had a scout sniper platoon in there, and I knew they had snipers rotating. So I went back into the rear, and for 3 days, I begged and begged and begged. I had the MOS, I had the training, I begged, and they finally gave me the job as a scout sniper.
Mawhinney soon learned that what he was taught in sniper school did not prepare him for the action in Vietnam.
As far as scout sniper school, teaching stalking, fieldcraft, land nav, I had a tiny bit of basics from basic training, but they went and they took it a couple steps further in sniper school, taught us natural camouflage. Now you remember in Vietnam it was so hot over there and the humidity was so high, ghillie suits, things like that were pretty much out of the question. You're already packing 140 pounds of gear. So too hot for ghillie suits, so they taught us how to use natural vegetation for camouflage. They taught us how to move through the area without setting off booby traps. which was one of the key things. You stayed off trails, especially if you were traveling at night, because Charlie didn't want to spend all the time booby trapping all the ground over there. Normally booby trap trails because that's what Americans walked on. So we learned early, as soon as we was over there, if you stayed off the trails, the chances of hitting booby traps were pretty slim. At night, it's hard to detect a booby trap because you don't have a light, you don't have anything with you. You're trying to move quiet. So we learned by staying in the thick vegetation was pretty much out of the area that they booby trapped.
How did you use the natural vegetation? Did you have some sort of webbing on your uniform or your clothing that you broke it off and stuck it in there? Tell me specifically about that.
Okay, on natural camouflage, and it varied by sniper teams and how they used it. I found out we had inner tube tires that we'd cut into strips. We used for our weapons, we used for our arms, for our legs, onto our packs. We also used string, parachute cord, whatever we could use to tie it on. Vegetation is, all it is anything to break up your outline. And you want to try to match the color of the area that you're in. The big key is when you get to your final firing position, you do not want to use up the vegetation around the area that you're going to, because that makes it fairly obvious somebody has done something in that around that position. So what we tried to do as we was getting close to the final position, what was going in, we start picking our vegetation to take in with us. I didn't stay out for days and days, so that wasn't a problem as far as things welting. Usually we'd set up before daylight, and by evening that evening, we'd be starting back out of the area again.
Did you use camo paint at all?
Yes, we used camo paint. We also used some of the leaves over there that were green that you could actually rub onto your skin and it would give a green color. And the main thing was just to break up the outline.
When you moved through the jungle over there, did you just assume you were always under observation? I'm kind of curious how you can actually get to a position and to take out some people without them getting you first.
Okay, most of our movement went at night when it was just a two-man team. Most of our movement was at night. The trick is you don't let the villagers see you because you don't know who's friendly and who's not friendly. So you don't let the villagers see you. You stay in the heavy brush when you're moving. You stay off the trail, stay out of the rice paddies. And normally I would try to find, before I went out, an area. I would kind of pick my routes to and from. I'd find an area that I thought was going to be advantageous to us. And then I would look and see what kind of vegetation was going to be to the area that I wanted to sit up in. I'd kind of pick my routes from previous patrols when we were out, and then I would go and that's how we'd work our way into it. If you were, in times I came back in because I did move sometimes during the daytime, and at times I was picked up by village people. Somebody would see me, and I would abort the mission because I didn't know if they were going to get the word back to VC or if the people themselves were VC.
So you're in the thick vegetation. This may sound like a silly question, but what about creatures over there? Is that a big deal?
They had lots of creatures over there. They had lots of bugs, lots of snakes, lots of things, and everything grows big over there. I don't really know for sure, but they said there was like over 100 type of snakes in that area that we were in, and most of them were poisonous. Now, I don't know. I don't know of anybody that was bit by a snake that wasn't playing with a snake. Normally, most wildlife, if you leave it alone, it'll leave you alone. If you want to pick on it and play with it, then it wants to play back. So we didn't play with the stuff. I did sit out one night, and I had a snake that had to have been 15 foot long crawl across my legs. And my partner was sitting next to me, and I whispered to him, I said, "Don't move, I've got a big snake crossing me." Well, I don't know in reality time how long it was, but it seemed like an hour for me before this thing finally crossed my legs. It just kept crossing and crossing and crossing. And I don't know if it was a heavy snake. I don't know what kind of snake it was. I'm guessing it was a big cobra. But it's kind of an eerie feeling when you're sitting there. You can't move, you can't make noise, and you're sitting there and you've got these creatures crawling across you. You used to have rats over there that a small child could saddle and ride. I mean, there was some big things over there that we played with. Their bugs grow tremendous size. I mean, there was cockroaches over there that you could put one on each foot and use them like rollerboards. They're just, things grow big in that area. But what I'm trying to say is most everything, if you leave it natural, You don't mess with things. If something wants to crawl on you, let it crawl on you, let it leave, and it's not going to bother you. It's when you put something in a position that's trying to defend itself or it thinks it's threatened, that's normally when you have a problem. For me, being a scout sniper, I got to be an individual again. You got to remember, in the Marine Corps, there's no individuals. The Marine Corps always works as a unit, and we worked as a unit, but being a scout sniper team where we could detach from the company once in a while, give us a little bit of our own time, that's something you don't have as a rifleman in a company. So yes, I enjoyed that little bit of time, and I felt safer when we were out on a hide or when we were out moving than I did when I was in the perimeter with the company, because I knew I wasn't being seen. I knew I was in a position that they weren't going to locate me, and so I could be more relaxed when I was out by myself like that. Not by myself, but with my partner. We never ever went out without our partners. But yeah, like I say, there was no individuals in the Marine Corps, but you did feel a little bit better when the two of you could slip out and spend your time together.
Snipers in Vietnam learned to travel in two-man teams, a sniper and a spotter.
The sniper himself was usually the team leader that carried 700 Remington rifle. The spotter carried the automatic weapon for his firepower. What we would do as the sniper himself was more or less in charge of the team. What we would do is we'd trade off with the partner constantly to let him practice and learn, let him shoot the 700. When we had a good shot, a shot that we knew he could make, and one for building confidence, then we'd finally, when we felt he was ready, the team leader would give the spotter then the weapon and let him make his first shot with it. Then you'd have to watch him for a minute and see how he dealt with it and how everything went, talk to him a little bit. And all my spotters were good spotters. I never had any problems with anybody that had remorse or thought they'd done something wrong. Some people, that's kind of how we screened them. Some people didn't like it. They didn't do well. And at that time, that was the decision of the team leader if they should carry on as being a sniper, stay in that role or not. I was a spotter for approximately 2 months before I got a rifle. Everybody that comes in to be a sniper gets the opportunity to be a spotter. And normally it's about 2 to 3 months before you rotate up as a team leader with the 700 rifle. Normally about that time, depending on who's rotating and what's going on. So you change partners about every 3 months. The first month is really a strict training time with your new spotter. Most of them are just fresh from the States. They've got everything to learn. It's kind of like starting over. So as you progress, you can go a little farther, you can do a little bit more. You do more things without talking because you start to understand each other, sign language, what's going on. People start learning how you act, how you work, what you do, and you learn from each other how each other takes care of any situation. The longer you spend with somebody, of course, the more risks you end up taking because you feel a little more comfortable going a little farther out with them. And about the time you get somebody that's outstanding, that's excellent, you can travel all night, you can go all day, you don't have to talk, you know what's going on with each other. About that time happens, then they would rotate back and you'd get a brand new guy with his little white head going, "Hi, I'm your new spotter." So you start all over again. I did have the opportunity to work with a gentleman named Dan Keys, another Lakeview boy, or Oregon boy. Dan was more or less born in a, small town, did a lot of work in the country, and I did spend about 7 months with Dan. And they kept us together as long as they could keep us together. But at the time that they did separate us, it was probably good because we were starting to take a few risks that we shouldn't be taking. So,
Did you ever lose one? Did you ever get partner get killed?
No. As far as partners, that was my ultimate goal, was to get my partner and myself out of Vietnam alive. That was my ultimate goal of anything. All the rest fell in place. That was the ultimate goal. And I was fortunate. I never lost a partner. I had a few of them dinged up a little bit and shrapnel and wounded a little bit, but I never lost a partner.
But in Vietnam, Mawhinney's best friend was his Remington rifle.
Our weapon was a Remington Model 700, and it was actually a modified version of a hunting rifle. We had a medium-heavy barrel on it. The armors had glass-bedded the stock on it, The receiver was glass bedded. It was free floated. The triggers were taken down to about 3.5, 4 pounds of pull. Had the red filled 3 to 9 scope on it. It was a very effective rifle. We sighted our rifles in for 500 meters, and then everything was hauled off up to about 600, 700 meters, and then we would dial up 1,000-meter dope for elevation on it, and then it was all hauled again for long-range shooting. Your rifle is your life. Your equipment is your life. You're only as good as your equipment. If your rifle's not functioning properly, you're not functioning. So the weapon, we took extreme care of it. It was clean. If we went out and we were out all night, we came back in the next morning. Before we ate, before we did anything, the weapon was cleaned, put back, made sure it was taken care of first. The weapons we had were good. They were adequate for what we did, but we also took as good a care of them as we did our own self. Gear-wise, what we carried was just a standard issue of everything from extra clothing, extra socks, extra chow, extra water. We had our poncho liners, our ponchos. We had a machete. I learned, this is something I want to add real quick, but I did learn something being in the infantry for three months. You don't really have a life of your own when you're in the infantry. So when supplies come in, extra ammo, laws, it doesn't make any difference. C4, claymores, whatever gear that comes in, it's divided between the entire company to pack the gear. So what I did with my partner it was very important that we were accepted with the companies we work with. So me and my partner would go down and we'd load up our share of the gear also that they were carrying. So whatever our load was, our share was to help pack, we also packed that. Very, very important. Now, when we left, I had to be tight enough with the company. When we left for a day or so, I had to be tight enough with people in that company. I could leave my mainframe pack, leave that gear with them, leave all our extra stuff that we didn't need for the day, and then we took a little day pack that we packed with us. We'd take like 40 rounds of ammo for the M700. We would take up to 5-6 clips for the M14. We would take just what we need to have, just enough food to get us by, and we travel as light as we could, a little extra water, just what we needed to go out and set up for the day.
During his tour, Mawhinney learned the ropes working with infantry.
Well, like I say, I started in infantry, so I know exactly what them people went through. Well, knowing that I was going to leave a company that I was going to be working with, and part of my job was to go out as a scout and leave the company, I wanted to be as tight as I could with that company, because if something happened to us out there, say we were even 600,000-700,000 meters from the company and something happened to us, and we got compromised, and all of a sudden there's automatic weapon fire going on, I didn't want the people in the company to go, snipers just screwed up. You know what I mean? I want them guys on the run. I want a squad coming out there to get my butt out of there. And that happened a couple times, and it was very, very helpful being in tight with them. I would do things like where a squad would be out all day on a patrol, and me and my partner might have been working close to the lines to our perimeter, and we had a pretty easy day set up. We could take turns. We could nap a little bit during the day. Well, when that squad would come in at night, they still have to stand lines. It didn't matter if they humped all day. They still have to do their line duty that night on the perimeter. So what we'd do is take our starlight scope. We'd go over because we'd be rested up. We'd trade off and we'd take their positions and let them get a little bit of rest. Well, by doing this, we started making friends with the companies we worked with, and we started making good friends this way. They liked us, and we would do anything we could to support that company. We weren't just going out to be snipers. Never did just go out to be snipers with a company. We were kind of their eyes and ears, and that was our major job, I feel, as scout snipers over there. We were their eyes and ears. If I knew, and the CO would tell us, and it was very important that we worked not only with the line people, but we worked with the command post and with the company commanders and the lieutenants from the platoons. And when I knew that they were going to go into a ville, maybe a click away, in a day or two, they had enemy movement in this area had been observed by aircraft or something. Well, we'd sometimes slip out at night. We'd sit up on this ville, and we'd sit there and watch it all day long. We would take a map with us, and we'd sit there and we'd draw out what was going on in the ville. We'd draw out just every ville that we could see, draw it to detail, and then we'd find trails that the local villagers were not using, they were avoiding. We'd make sure we'd draw these trails out. We'd put them on our maps for the people. We'd show them where these trails were. We'd let them know what kind of enemy was in there, if it was NBA regulars, if it was VC. We'd watch and see what the people were doing, if they're carrying on their regular life, or if they were doing something different that they shouldn't have been doing. We make notes of all of these things that we'd observe out there for that day. Then when we come back in, we could get with the platoon commanders that were going to have to go out and face this ville and show them where these trails were that we know are booby-trapped because the local villagers won't use them. They're avoiding them. We could show them that information, and by doing this, I felt that we were helping, we were saving people's lives. We were keeping them out of areas that were booby-trapped. Also, if we run into a large NVA force in one of these areas, we'd let them know, hey, don't go out there with a squad or a platoon. You've got way too much enemy. Our job, when we were doing this, our job wasn't to fire on the enemy. Our job was to go out and observe. And we did a lot of that work with the companies. So by doing this and giving them that information that helped save their lives, we've become very extremely tight with the guys in the company we worked with. We were assigned to a company, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd Battalion. We were assigned a company, and we would go out for, depending on the area they worked in, where I normally work was Arizona Territory, but we'd go to an area that we could be effective in, because once they got in the canopy, we weren't very effective. So once we joined up with the company, the very first thing you did is go in, introduce yourself to the company commander, the company gunny, explain to them what our job was, what we could do for them, anything that they had requests for us to do. We try to get a common ground with the company commander. So we weren't asked to do missions like walk point and all these war stories you hear. So we weren't asked to do things that we didn't feel that we were equipped to do, but also to let them know that what we could do for them as their eyes and ears. So that's the first thing you do, is establish a rapport with the company that you were working with. Then we would do everything from go on patrols, squad-sized patrols, platoon-sized patrols. A lot of times on patrols, we'd slip off a little bit. If we were getting into a hot area, we'd slip off a little bit and flank the patrol, a couple 100 yards, flank the patrol. One time, I had a patrol that I was with. We was with 2 squads. I was kind of in the center because we were going to split, and I was going to be up to the front of the 2nd squad that we were working with. Well, as we came into the Smallville, we got ambushed. And as we got ambushed, I took off running, and I decided I would get on this little hillside just above it and see if maybe I could get some downfire on the enemy. What I didn't realize when I did this, I got on the backside of the enemy all right, but also I was receiving the friendly fire because everybody's shooting at the enemy, and I'm on the receiving end of it, and I learned that was probably one of the better moves I'd made. But so that's what we do, is we work patrols with them. We'd go out and we'd go night ambushes with them. They'd set up a night ambush. We'd take our starlight scope, mount it on the M14. During the day, the scope stayed in a pack because it was ineffective during the day. At night, we'd mount the starlight scope on the M14, and we'd go out anywhere we stand perimeter lines to going out on night ambushes with them. Sometimes we'd go on patrols with squads, platoons, or stay with the company. Sometimes we would go out by ourselves, the 2 of us, and that's normally when we went by ourselves. And I remember I said we traveled at night, and that's normally because we didn't want to be compromised. We traveled at night. So the communication was critical, so they knew exactly where I was going to be, exactly when I was going out, exactly when I was going to come back, because I don't want to be coming in at night and be mistaken for the enemy coming in. So all of the communication was critical when you went out by yourself, as a team. If we were going in an area, which sometimes we'd set up an ambush, we would take a fire team with us, with a radio, and say we were moving, and several times we had some vills that we knew we were going to draw fire from when we came in, from past areas, past times we'd worked this. So what we'd do is we'd pick a hide that we knew Charlie was going to come out the end of after they had engaged. They'd start calling in artillery. Charlie would come out the back end. Sometimes we'd take a fire team with us. We'd set up, hide, and wait. The company'd come in, they'd engage, and then as soon as they started calling artillery in, Charlie'd come out the back, and then we'd go to work. We'd have the fire team there for protection for us, and plus we had a radio, so we could keep calling in artillery, directing it for the backside of the bill. So we were pretty open as far as what we did. Most of the time, the company commanders would allow us to work what we were comfortable with. So depending on what the mission was, and it changed daily over there, you just adapted to it and did the best you could to help that company out that you were assigned with. You feel bad. I mean, you've lost a good comrade, but it's also a lesson to you, and it keeps you on your toes. I don't want to sound cold or mean about it or nothing, but people die in war, and it's hard to accept, but you have to accept it and go on, because if you mentally can't prepare yourself for people going to die, you're not going to survive.
For the sniper, the rules of engagement were clear-cut.
For us, like, the rules of engagement were pretty simple. When we were over there, it was, if they was an enemy that you could identify, say they had NBA uniform on, or they were carrying a weapon, or if they was a farmer carrying a weapon, they were the enemy. So the rules of engagement in Vietnam were pretty basic. You knew if that person had a weapon, you had the optics. So at that time, you made a decision, were you going to shoot or were you going to observe? It depended on the area. Each situation is different. It depended on what the operation was. But if we were going out on a hide to observe and we had a small force, normally we'd take a shot. I'd take a shot, and then as soon as we shot once, we headed back for the company. You didn't stay in an area because the area we was in had a lot of VC plus NBA regulars in it. The second shot you fired normally would give your position away. They'd start pinpointing where you're at. And it's pretty hard to hide a company, so they pretty much knew you had to go from point A to point B to get back to the company. And if they could, they'd try to get in to ambush you on the way back. So normally when we shot, I ran a lot of Vietnam. When we'd shoot, we would run, and we'd head our way back to the company as hard as we could go. If it was a small force, normally that's when we would pick up a squad. We'd go back to the area that we just fired from and go down and try to retrieve weapons or whatever we could get, what information.
With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Too busy with your end-of-summer goals to cook but want to make sure you're eating well? With Factor, skip the extra trip to the grocery store and the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too, while still getting the flavor and nutritional quality you need. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy, then get back to crushing your goals. Level up with Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
I've heard stories, I think maybe Pat probably talked about getting into his bubble when he was getting ready to take a shot. Can you describe that process for you? Did you have a ritual or something you went through? Did you, to prep to say, okay, I want to do it, now what did you do?
To prep for a shot, like I say, every situation was different. Yes, if you were set up in a hide, you had a specific area you were watching, and you knew you were going to take a shot in this area, then you had a lot of time for preparation. And to take a shot wasn't, we shot that rifle so much over there, it wasn't one of them things you thought about. It was a natural thing that occurred. When you seen your target, it came up, and it's just like typing. You don't have to think each step of where your finger's going to go for this typewriter to make a word. It was the same with taking a shot. When you seen your target, you identified your target, you knew the range on the target. As soon as the rifle come up, you was already picking the winds, picking your hold. Now, our rifles were sighted in for 500 meters, and we could dial into 1,000 meters. Everything else was hold off. So while that rifle was coming up, while you're getting ready to fire, all of the stuff is going through your mind. You come up, you know your hold, your spotter's watching, you squeeze the trigger. If that enemy didn't go down at that time, normally he could see about where you hit. Long shot with the humidity. Each time you shot was specific for what was happening at that time. If it was offhand, if it was in a sitting position, if it was in a prone position. Very, very few times do you do prone positions. Now, as a spotter, you estimated range constantly with your partner. And what we used, we had the rangefinder and scopes, but I never used it, and maybe some of the snipers did, but I personally didn't use it. And I learned to estimate range by size, by the football field method, that looks like 6 football fields to there. And then by practicing it, you practice and practice and practice with your partner. How far is it to here? How far is it to there? So as we would be moving, I'd ask my partner, how far is it to this ville, or to this hut in this ville? And we were going that way, we were going to walk by it. Then I'd have him count his steps. And we totally, all the time, practice on range estimation because it was critical to us for distance for our shots. Most of our shots were 1,000 under 1,000 meters. Once in a while, we'd shoot at a little bit farther. But as far as preparation, you automatically know when you're looking at something, by the time the rifle's up pretty close to the range, how far it was, to what your hold off was, and then it was just following the natural steps of squeezing the trigger.
What about, they talk about, Tom Farron talks about, you see that guy's eyes in your scope because you've got a scope. How did that affect you? What did you think about it, especially if you observed somebody for a good while? Tell me what went through your mind.
As far as observing someone through a scope I was going to fire the weapon at, I never paid much attention to their eyes. I go to detail what they had, what they were wearing. That was the main thing I looked at. And as far as people looking at me, yeah, I've seen them look towards me, but I never really thought about that. I knew it was the enemy. My job was to put that enemy down. And I didn't think much about that. I thought where I'm going to hold, what the wind is, what's going on, to make sure that the shot was going to be a success. We shot for center mass. I didn't worry about that.
In February of 1969, Mawhinney faced the moment every sniper dreamed of.
I think for me that one of the missions, that one of the times that if anything went right for a sniper, it did, was the night on the Tubon River. We were probably 300 to 500 meters in from the riverbank. It was getting late that evening. I was working with Delta 15. It was February 14th, 1969. I remember that day because it was Valentine's Day. That evening, right before dusk, it was during 69 Tet Offensive, right before dusk, observation aircraft flew over and said there was a large number of NBA regulars across the river moving towards our position. So that evening, I sat down with the company commander, asked him if we could take our starlight scope and go down to the river and just observe that evening. He gave us permission. We left the lines, we went down there, and it was one of the pitch-perfect places to where the river had receded, and you've seen how the river eddies out into the bank. Well, it made us not only concealment, but it gave us some cover. We got down there with the starlight that night, and the river is probably 110 yards wide. It was fairly shallow in that area because the river had widened out. We sit down there that evening with the starlight scope for a couple hours, and we started noticing the enemy moving a little bit on the other side of the river. And to my surprise, a scout, NVA scout, walked across the river and came out within probably 20, 30 yards of me, clear across the river, and they never had to swim. At one time, the water was about up to his neck, but he didn't have to swim. He walked out on the bank on the side next to us, and he was close enough that night that I could hear the water dripping off of him. That's how close he was. I had the M14 on him. I had the starlight on him. Had 20-round clip in. Had the rifle on semi-automatic. He walked up onto the bank, looked around, and then we started into the high grass, the elephant grass. Probably there was 10 foot until you got into the elephant grass. I remember my company was in this elephant grass back in there 500-600 meters. He started towards the elephant grass, and I started to go ahead and dispatch him because I couldn't let him get between me and the company. He stopped at the edge of the elephant grass right before I fired. He stood there for a moment, walked back down by the bank, and then he decided to cross the river again and go back. So we let him cross the river, and I told my partner, you know, this might get real interesting. Well, it did. Later that evening, here they come. They were probably 10 feet apart. An entire line of NVA started to cross the river in the same route he took. They had all their gear on, their packs on, holding their rifles up, and they started to cross the river. And as soon as the first one started up the bank on our side, I went to work. I got 16 rounds off that night as fast as I could fire the weapon. Every one of them were headshots. They were dead center. We started drawing small arms fire from the other side of the bank because they didn't know what was going on. All they could do was hear shooting. I could see these bodies floating down the river. We started drawing small arms fire, retreated. We went back to our company. They never did cross the river that night. But to this day, I've always wondered what their company commander's report was of what happened to them. We kind of nicknamed that the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, you know. But if anything could go right for a sniper, I mean, it was one of them that you never forget. If anything could go right for a sniper, it all went for us that night.
So you think 16, you said?
16 rounds, yes.
Well, you know what? Tell me about the enemy, son. Tell me about if you had any respect for him as you know, for as a warrior, or as his habits, or what do you have to say about, you know, NVA or
NVA were hardcore. They come down to fight. They had a lot rougher than we did. They didn't have helicopters bringing them their supplies. They had a hard life down there. I had a lot of respect for the NVA. I had a lot of respect for the VC because they lived like animals also over there. They had it worse than we did. We had air support. They didn't have air support. So they had a rough life over there. I mean, they had a job to do. We had a job to do. And I guess that's the way it works in war. I had a lot of respect for them. I didn't hate the enemy. But towards the end, you start getting a bitter taste in your mouth towards the enemy because as friends die, as people you work with die, and you realize what it is. You're in a war with another country, and these people are your enemy. But as far as hating, I don't think I totally hated the enemy. I did have respect for him, but my job was to, you know, demoralize them and do what we could.
Mawhinney believes his complete dedication to the art and craft of the sniper was responsible for his success.
As far as being a successful sniper, everybody over there worked a little bit different, had a little bit different ways of doing things. And for me, there were several things that put together to make a sniper team successful. The very first one was the training that we had that the Marine Corps gave us. To me, that was critical of going over being a sniper, was being properly trained. The second thing that when you got into the country, you had to be in an area that was going to be advantageous to snipers. I know snipers that were up north that were in 3rd Division that never fired their weapon at a soldier. So it depended on what area you was in, and I was in probably the best area you could have been in to be a sniper. Then it was the company commanders and the people that we worked with, the leaders that we worked with, how they deployed us, what they would do, let us go out and work the way we could be most effective, and to work with us in setting up small ambushes, and to work with us so we could be effective for them. And last but not least, and the very most important thing, was the thousands of brave young Marines that I worked with that made our job happen. Because without them people, we couldn't have done anything.
Talk about how long you were in Vietnam when you left.
Well, I ended up arrived in country in Vietnam would be end of April 1968. I completed a 13-month tour. I spent, like I say, about 3 months in the infantry, then 10 months as a sniper. Then I returned on another 6-month extension. Then I did another 6-month extension, and I would have done another 6-month extension, but they wouldn't allow me any longer.
Why?
Because they felt we'd been in Vietnam too long.
No, I mean, why do you want to keep extending? What was it?
I personally kept extending for Vietnam because I didn't like all the spit, shine, and polish that they had back in the States. I felt comfortable in Vietnam. The longer I was there, the more I felt like I could work my way around that country, the more I got to be part of the country. So, yeah, I stayed over there, and I didn't quite feel right about going home when I had friends still over there being shot at. It just didn't feel comfortable to me. I felt I was being successful. I was being part of the effort by staying there. I extended the first time as a scout sniper. I extended the second time as a scout sniper, and I wasn't allowed to be a scout sniper on the second extension. So I opted to be a door gunner on a helicopter because I'd been in the field too long. I talked to a chaplain that was kind of a psychiatrist, I guess, for the Marine Corps, and they felt I had combat fatigue, which I didn't have at all, but they felt I had combat fatigue because I'd been in the field for the amount of time I had been. So, and it varied and it changed, but I was there probably as a sniper carrying a weapon about as long as anybody I know. When I got back from Vietnam, I ended up being a rifle instructor up at Camp Pendleton. I worked as a PMI. I had the opportunity to work with the recruits. I had the opportunity to work with some of the Navy candidates going through school down at Coronado. Had a chance to play a little bit back stateside, but they started pulling people back about that time from Vietnam. So the Marine Corps didn't have housing for everybody. They didn't have a place to put everyone. So they started becoming, let's put it, very meticulous on detail, inspections sometimes 2 times a day, confined to base, played a game with us for a little while. And then it got to the point that they said, we got an early out. Anybody that signed up for 4 years, now I had volunteered for the Marine Corps, went in for 4 years, said anybody like out just a little bit early, we'll give you that opportunity. So of course, playing the games, most of us elected to go ahead and get out a little early. So I only spent 4 or 5 months stateside, and then we got out.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation of In Their Own Words. This program was created and produced by First Person Productions in association with the Documentary Broadcasting Company. The stories told herein were supplied by the Honor Project. Produced by David Benson. Content written and produced by Dave Barsky. Engineered by Greg Bartheld and Brian Donovan. Narrated by Bill Ratner. This production is copywritten by First Person Productions, Incorporated. Any unauthorized broadcast, public performance, or copying is a violation of applicable laws.
Step back in time and discover the untold stories of history's greatest heroes. From ancient civilizations to modern times, the Anthology of Heroes podcast takes you on a journey through history, uncovering the bravery and determination of those who stood up for what they believed in. These aren't just stories from old history books. They're the human experiences of those who fought for justice, freedom, and their principles. From the defiance of Vercingetorix as he stood against Rome, to the unwavering spirit of Skanderbeg as he faced down the Ottoman Empire, each episode is a journey through their life as we follow their triumphs and their failures. Meticulously researched with quotes and observations from primary sources, Anthology of Heroes is the perfect blend of expert research and engaging storytelling. So listen and subscribe now on your favorite podcasting app.